Your biggest success was Wham, wasn't it?
I think it was the biggest success in several ways. They were the group which got to be the biggest while I was their manager. The biggest success in that I and my partner Jazz Summers, we were two of us managing, made a plan with them of how to make them the biggest group in the world without having to go through the enormous palaver of breaking America by touring endlessly and doing 6,000 radio station interviews. And over a dinner at Bombay Brasserie and a bottle of wine, you see, the greatest things do come from drink, we suddenly hit on the idea, wit don't you be the first group
Might have
ever.
had a greater one if you hadn't had the bottle.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better idea, though. I hit on the idea to be the first group ever to play in Communist China. You know, and George, who had this marvellous way of knowing a good idea, and he helped him and said, yes, fix it. And so suddenly it went from a bottle of wine over dinner to actually having to go to China, meet heads of government and get them to agree that Wham could come and be the first group ever to play in China.
You became a politician.
Absolutely. And when I went 17, 18 times eventually. I mean,
Is that how long it took? How many trips it took?
Once a month for 18 months before I got the approval. And it was Deng himself who gave the approval. I mean, there was nowhere lower down was going to give the approval to that. I met people lower down, it went up and up the chain. And
17 or 18 times because you were beating your head against the brick wall?
Couldn't find a way in to begin with. I mean, you go to China, and this was 15 years ago, it probably isn't that different now, but if you want to talk to a head of a government, you don't just turn up and say, well, I'm Simon Napier, can I talk to the head of government, please? And I had this policy. I went every month, and I phoned all the people I knew who were important and left messages that I was there, and went away again. And by the third month, these people had seen these messages appear on their desk. They obviously began to think I must be quite important because I was coming all the time, and it didn't seem to bother me that I didn't speak to them. So they presumed I was speaking to somebody else more important about something else. And eventually I began to get one or two calls back, and I just found my way in, found the right department, talked to them, never, ever asking a question which they could say yes or no to. The way I got Wham into China, I never asked that question. I'd say things like,
that's what they say about interviewing, too.
Never. I'd say things like, you know, it'd be marvellous one day if a pop group came and played in China. It'd be lovely for you to see that culture. You know, and then we'd have a dinner. And then the next time I go is, you know, and if, you know that thing I said, a pop group coming, if one day a pop group can be wonderful if it was Wham, the group I managed, because they're awfully good. You know, that's it. And another month would go by, and I said, you know, if one day Wham came to play in China, it would be fantastic if they could play at the Workers' Stadium. It's such a nice stadium. This went on and on and on until finally I'd really said it all, and I knew they would be consulting other people because in the course of this I'd taken 5 members of the Politburo to Japan to see Wham and paid for the whole thing, and you know, had them see the reality of it.
Extraordinary procedure, wasn't it?
It was amazing.
But it worked.
Yeah, and finally I just couldn't stand it any longer. I went and I said, you know, it'd be really wonderful if one day Wham did come and play in China, if it was May the 14th and it was at this place. And I said, you know, and no yes or no there, so they still didn't say anything. And I went back to Singapore and I thought, we're going to do it. And I announced to the press that they'd said yes. And it was in the front page of every paper the next day.
Pushed them over the top.
They just couldn't say no. I knew they'd been discussing it at the highest level. But they just couldn't say no. But I still didn't know. And I came back to England and we were fixing the tour, and it was going to cost nearly $1 million, and we had to get the money from CBS Records. And I still wasn't 100% sure because no one had said yes. So I sent a telex. And no faxes and notices. There's a telex to the office I'd been talking to there. I said, could you send me a plan of the layout of the Workers' Stadium for March the 14th, which is the day we said. And 3 days later it came back, and where there was usually a basketball pitch, there was a stage, and on the stage it said Wham. To let the kids in town know they were there. We gave loads of cassettes away. But in the end, I don't think anyone in China knew Wham were playing there at all.
Rock had some political ambitions at that time, didn't it? Rock against racism.
It was going on simultaneously.
Like that.
It was extraordinary. I was going back and forth to China to fix up this bit of publicity for my group, just totally as a pop manager and nothing else, just thinking of money and publicity. And exactly the same time, Bob Geldof was doing something equally political, or equally using politics, to do something rather more worthwhile, setting up Live Aid. And we'd been talking quite a lot together about this because he'd originally come to me and asked what I thought about it, and I'd pointed out various ways where he could make a lot more money than he was contemplating, and also got George Michael involved in doing it. But of course, coming back from Wham in China, which is sort of a triumph in that I'd achieved what I set out to achieve, and certainly Wham had been made enormously famous in America in that week when they were in China, you know, I came back to see something really worthwhile, which is what Bob did.